This is going to be a very quick meeting. Maybe a record for us. We really only have one substantive stuff item, which is to talk about, to begin the conversation on water rates, which we'll do shortly. All right, so let's start out with public comment. No? Okay. Okay, so our next item is going to be to discuss the setting of water rates for the next fiscal year. So we've got as our guest tonight, our DPW head, Mr. Cundiff, and our water consultant, Matt Abramson. Abraham, sorry, Matt. Abrahams.
Good evening.
Hi.
We'll hold you true to your word and having a quick meeting. So in your packet, I distributed a memo which kind of lays out where we were last year, how we got here this year, and where we think we're headed for the rates coming forward. So last year, the board took a new approach on summarizing the fees and calculating the fees. We established what was called a base fee, which basically is a fixed cost associated with the water department. So that's a fee that gets charged to all users on the water system, and it's based on an equivalent meter size. So if you have a larger meter, you're going to pay a little more. If you have a smaller meter, you're going to pay less. But that base fee is strictly for our fixed operating costs. The user consumption fees are a tiered approach, and we have 4 tiers, and it's based upon, how much water each user uses. So the first tier, which is 0 to 1,000 cubic feet, it is based upon, it is a lower tier. And then as we go up for each tier, that consumption rate that you're paying goes up. So what we use to determine the fees associated with the consumption rate vary depending on ongoing projects, what kind of variable projects we had, obviously the MWRA fee that we pay associated with our water, pump maintenance, operating and maintenance costs. So that is all based on a number of equations, and it's really a little sophisticated as to how we calculate it for each tier, but Matt has done a great spreadsheet that allows us to, theoretically put in numbers and what if scenarios, which allows us to get to where we want to be. So as part of that, I wanted to just mention we have our capital master plan, which goes over, it laid out a number of projects we have on the docket for the next few years. Some of the projects have been completed since it was done in 2022. Other projects we think may or may not happen depending on the status of the Hopkinton connection. So because that's still unresolved at this point, we actually took those projects that would be affected by the Hopkinton project and put them on the side for this year. So we're not considering them as part of this recommendation. The one project that we are considering is a looping between Presidential Estates and Fisher Road that will improve the circulation in that area. And that was identified by PAR Engineering. And it's roughly about a $600,000 project that we're going to get going on right away once we get into next fiscal year. So in a nutshell, I'm going to let Matt take over from here. Matt Abrams, we've used the Abrams Group for the past number of years to help us with our rate schedule. And Matt's very familiar with the history of the town and the methodology we've used over those years. The thing about this year's approach and last year's approach is it's logical in terms of how you derive the base fee and the consumption fee.
You think it's logical?
I do.
Okay.
And it actually makes the most sense. All the users are benefiting from the fixed costs, so they all share in the fixed cost of the operation. The variable, which is their consumption rate, they have control over, and that's going to be our operating costs and capital projects. So if they want to not water their lawn and save on money, that they're entitled to do that. But the fixed cost is covered. So it's a logical approach that way. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, and he has a little presentation.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Good evening. Matt Abrahams from the Abrahams Group. Happy to be back before you this evening to talk about water rates. As Bill mentioned, we have assisted the town in the recent past with setting water rates, including this last fiscal year where, as Bill mentioned, there was a fairly significant overhaul. I'm not sure that's the right word, but there were significant changes to the structure, as well as Bill mentioned, a relook at the service charge and some changes to that as well, which we'll talk about this evening. So that's the first slide that we have for you tonight. I'm about to go through it. We have, I think, 4 slides for you this evening. And it's really meant as just a quick recap as to where we were, where we are now, and also where we think we're going. And I believe was mentioned already, to start the conversation for what rates might look like headed into FY25, which is the next fiscal year. So for FY24, so thinking back to what we were thinking about, what we were looking at about a year ago, the select board approved a rate structure change. And that change was I don't think we changed the number of tiers, but we changed what the tiers look like. So the tier breaks were lowered. What that means is the amount of usage per tier was lowered from what it was prior, which meant that users, if they were to use the same amount of water, would get into the higher tiers a little more quickly because of that change. There was also tier 1 was a minimum tier, which means that no matter what amount of water was used, up to 750 cubic feet, that there was no change in cost to the user. Now that minimum tier is no longer. Tier 1 is now a flow-based rate, so the user is paying for all of the flow used in tier 1. The rates in the higher tiers did not change, meaning the dollar amount for tiers 2 through 4, the dollar amount rate did not change. But as mentioned earlier, the tier breaks were lowered, so there was an impact even to users who were in the higher tiers. In addition to the rate structure change, the select board approved the service charge change. As was mentioned, this is a meter-based service charge. That is one that was in effect earlier, but we didn't know at the time, we didn't know what it was really based on, if it was based on anything at all. It may have been, it may not have been, we weren't sure. So we reinvigorated that and took a look at the best way to set that. The group that was working on this decided to focus on certain fixed costs that the water department had, regardless of how much water was used, and chose to identify those costs and recover those costs with the service charge. That was implemented last year. As Bill mentioned, it's based on equivalent meters. So larger meters pay more under that service charge setup. When we were looking at what we thought needed to happen past FY24 last year, because we always provide a multi-year look, we usually look 5 years into the future when we do these analyses. It was showing a need for a 3% annual increase to both rates and the service charge in order to maintain the targeted amount of retained earnings. And the target in this case is 20% of water fund expenditures. That is what we consider to be a healthy retained earnings balance, and one that we think a town like Southborough should shoot for. So we include that in our analysis as the target. Now, where are we today? We have updated our analysis since last year. We are now looking an additional year into the future. And we're more comfortable with where we think things are headed in the future now. And we are seeing that we do no longer believe that 3% per year is enough to cover the annual fund expenses. And as Bill mentioned, some of the capital that is part of the plan now. Some of the reasons why, less revenue this past year. If we think back to last summer was extremely wet. At the time when rates were set last year, we didn't know that was going to be the case. So very wet conditions means people do not water their lawns as much. They don't use as much water outdoors. That means revenues are down. Also a refocus on capital planning. I took a look back as to what was in our analysis last year for capital, and there wasn't much at all. Now there's more that we're focused on. We're going to cover that a little bit more in a moment. And also the indirect cost amount went up fairly significantly because of OPEB. There was an increase in the OPEB obligation, and that was added very recently to the budget for FY25. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, service charges. So we thought this was, I guess, a critical piece for thinking about next steps, where we're headed. As I mentioned earlier, the methodology to set service charges that was implemented last year is based on certain costs. Specifically, those costs are salaries in the water department and indirect costs. And those costs were split among the different users based on meter size, with larger meters paying more. We already talked about that. So thinking about FY25, that methodology, if it were to be used the same as it was in FY24, which would mean that the same costs would be included and designed to recover those costs, the service charges would end up going up about 25% for that reason. And if we think about it, the reason why is because of the indirect cost increase that I just mentioned a moment ago.
Is that the predominant reason? I mean, I know we went from, if we're talking only about the indirect costs. We're only talking about the indirect costs that the town charges the Water Enterprise Fund for all the services the town provides? Or are we talking about something else as far as your indirect cost?
So the indirect costs are what you just mentioned.
Okay,
The
because I went from 250 to 373. So it did go up a lot.
Yeah, most
Okay.
of it is related to the OPEB increase that I mentioned.
Yeah.
Not related to the services that the town is charging. Those are still in there.
All right, so that's what we're
Those-
calling indirect cost, is that charge. Okay.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so it's services. Sometimes we refer to them as central services. So if we think about the departments here at the townhouse, the services that they provide on behalf of the water fund, like the accounting department, for example, the treasurer, they do things for the water department, but they're not paid out of the water fund for those things. So it's almost like a reimbursement of sorts. That's an indirect charge. That's just part of it. Then I haven't looked too thoroughly at what's in there. I do know OPEB's in there. There might be some insurances in there as well. But having indirect costs for an enterprise fund is a very, very common thing.
Okay, but that's it. That's what's causing the fixed cost to be more now than they were a year ago. Is that one change?
Well, salaries has an impact.
Yeah.
But
I-
not nearly as much as the indirect cost increase.
Okay, all right.
Yes, the indirect cost increase that I've mentioned is the main driver here. So
Does that mean then that we would expect budget reductions in the departments that are now being partially funded from these indirect costs?
Yeah, so if you go to the other income and expenses on the Excel workbook, you'll see that there's a bigger number there. So yes, it's impacted. It's basically reduced it on the town side. So it is a net
of
zero sum here.
Yeah, well,
So water pays more, town pays less.
so full disclosure, I have a well and I don't have access to municipal water, so from a purely selfish perspective, that's good, but I just want to make sure we understand.
Yeah, so you're right, zero sum.
okay. So again, just to recap, if that same methodology were to be used and used the exact same way, meaning just update the costs and then recover those costs, you're looking at about a 25% increase for the service charge. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the way that it's set. I mean, we did make a conscious effort to base it on cost last year. And in general, I'd recommend that the charge be based on some costs. But that doesn't have to be the way that it moves forward. And the point being that if the select board were to choose not to follow that methodology and maybe increase it less, then that would have a greater impact on the flow-based rates. The money would have to come from somewhere. So that means the rates would be higher in essence.
I had one question. I'm new to the game, but the 4-inch users and the 2-inch users, who are those?
Who are the accounts that have those?
Yes,
I don't have that off the top of my head. I could probably get you an answer though within a few minutes here. If you just,
Well, are they residential or are they businesses?
No, they'd be businesses that size.
So are they gonna, I mean, 25% seems like a big jump, but when you see the base charges for some of these, it's not that much of a jump, is it really?
I can actually tell you what the increases would be if that interests you.
Maybe that would be useful.
But Marguerite, don't forget that their overall bill's not going to go up 25%. Just a piece of it is. The rest of it is going to possibly go up 3% as far as their actual usage.
Yep.
So I'm not sure what their overall bill's going up with that, but it's a mix of the two.
Correct.
And if they don't use as much, if we have another wet summer, there's
Right, right.
hard to predict all those variables.
It's 25% of $37.94 doesn't hit me as catastrophic.
So the increase there for the number that you just mentioned, which is for a 5/8 inch meter, is about $9.50 per quarter. That's
Okay.
a quarterly
So
charge.
$40 a year.
Yeah. Would I be correct in assuming that most homes in town have either a 3/4 or a 1-inch connection?
You got that number? I would say that's a correct assumption, but I haven't been here long enough to say that confidently.
And
So the smallest meter size is 5/8 inch, and commonly residential accounts have 5/8 inch, 3/4, sometimes an inch in size,
okay,
but not usually more than that.
okay, but okay.
So
Um,
I have some counts that we compiled last year, if that's helpful.
We can take that offline. So the other question I have, I actually got several questions. Can you give me an idea about how many cubic feet a typical home uses? And I realize that there's no such thing
Right, but we do.
on
like-
average.
We do like to put something in there, and when we do these analyses, if you're just talking about percentages, sometimes that's hard to grasp or figure out what we're saying there, so we always put dollars on it as well. So we do have a table of users, sample users, not tied to specific users in town, but sample users based on their usage on a quarterly bill. And we did calculate what we think the average residential user is, and we have that as 2,600 cubic feet per quarter.
Okay, so they would be just over into the tier 3 for their highest rate.
Yes.
Okay. So here's the other question that I have, and it's a competitive question. Because I'm aware that there are folks out there that now who like to water their lawns. And I guess we really do want them to water their lawns because the MWRA wants to sell water.
Absolutely. We want the
but,
revenue.
at that higher end, we are also competing with people who might make the decision to put in a well or may have a well on their property. I'm just curious as to whether, you've done any whether you're sensitive to that or not.
Whether we're sensitive to people possibly.
Whether we
Well-
price it so high that we encourage people to go dig a well for their irrigation. Stay on town water for the house, but dig a well for their irrigation. So is there some type of break even where it looks like we might flip people over to thinking that's the better thing to do?
That's not.
Yeah.
something-
Probably a hard thing to.
Okay.
Yeah,
compute.
not-
But
I know people that have done that.
I do too.
Yeah.
I do.
Definitely possible.
I do
but
too.
my recollection is we actually went to this tiered pricing to have higher rates for higher users to actually encourage water conservation, as a matter of fact. So I think that was the conversation.
That's exactly right. John Butler
that
did a
several years
study
ago.
on advisory, whatever now,
Yeah.
15 years ago, used Sudbury as example. And from that concluded that, the higher prices is going to
Makes a
encourage,
difference.
and we've got the numbers to prove it. Our water use has gone down,
Did go
down, down, down.
Yep.
Um,
I mean, my personal
well-
view is I think conservation is trumps the issue of selling more water and generating income. I'm willing to pay a little bit more to get
I
conservation,
guess-
frankly.
If someone drills a well, all we're doing is walking away from revenue.
Right, yep.
And I've heard it said that the MWRA wants to sell water. They've
Yeah.
got lots of water.
The flip side of that is, and it's not a perfect one-to-one, but the MWRA does charge the town for water use, so.
Yeah.
if there's less water usage because people are moving to wells, then the charges in theory would be less as well.
And the MWRA actually has the same issue that we do in terms of fixed costs. So in fact, they're selling less water. They're motivated to increase the price to cover their fixed cost,
Yeah.
which doesn't change. So it's a
That's true, but it's
vicious cycle there.
the way it breaks out. And I know you notice it's based
Yep.
on how many, the share of each.
Right.
unit,
Yep,
So
yep,
Still use
someone has to. pay
water.
for it.
Kathy,
exactly.
I have a question.
Andrew?
Um,
All right, that was just an aside.
So hold on a second. Andrew's got a question.
could you explain again, the OPEB piece of this? So you increase the base charge because of there is a, additional indirect cost for OPEB. So then where through the budget does that, money flow to? Do you understand my question?
I'll try and answer it. You
Okay.
can tell me if I answer or not.
All right.
So indirect costs is a line item in the water budget annually.
Yeah.
Those are costs that the water fund pays or transfers into the general fund.
Yep.
To recover costs in the general fund. So the number identified in the indirect cost line, there's a methodology that the town uses every year to
Mhm.
determine what that amount is. I probably have it. We need to look at it, but there are certain costs in there. And these are costs that are calculated each year based on whatever they are that year. So like if we're talking about the Treasury Department, there's probably an allocation for their costs based on some percentage or
Yeah.
some number. And their costs presumably go up every year. Their budget probably goes up every year. So
Yep.
that'll bump up a little bit every year. And then there are other costs that might be a little bit more firm, I guess. If it's an insurance, that might come from insurance agency and whatever the costs are, they might probably go up every year, but maybe they go down a year. Whatever that number is whatever that number is. OPEB specifically, are you familiar with OPEB and what it is?
Yep.
You are, okay. So that's an obligation, it's a liability for, I guess is probably the right term, that the town really should be setting aside for future expenses, right?
Yep.
So the specific reason why it went up, and I'm not an expert on this, but I did hear that it's because of multiple employees that weren't part of that calculation in the past that are now part of that calculation. And the most recent actuarial study provided to the town included those employees, and therefore the number is higher than the last time the study was done.
That's exactly what Brian Ballantyne told me this
Yep.
afternoon too, word for word.
Yep. And we haven't seen that latest study yet. We're scheduled to listen.
No,
to
but
it,
it's
folks.
done now. So that's exactly
Yeah.
what he says is happening.
And the other variability is that number, actuarial science is extremely opaque for me anyway.
Yeah,
that
but
number
in this
bounces
case, I
around a
think
lot.
there should have been
Yeah.
more put into the pot as far as
Right.
who contributes to the costs or the services provided to the water department. So this is not going to go down. It's going
Right, yeah.
to, so it's up now and it should stay up.
But even if
Okay.
you keep the same number of employees in there, we've seen some interesting swings in terms of the OPEB liability as market interest rates and stock market performance vary, et cetera. So it's hard to predict those numbers, but
and when
Gonna
we
be
went through
there.
this methodology last year, we didn't know this was gonna happen. We chose that methodology. It made sense at the time. It
Yeah.
still makes sense. It's just unfortunate that the numbers are a little
So
bit
if we
different.
if back a year ago, we knew what we now know, we would have set the base charge a little bit higher, right?
Possibly, it would have been an interesting discussion because part of my opinion, one of the reasons why it was appealing the way we did it last year was because there was not that much change between the prior version and the new way for the smaller meter sizes. It was only like a 50 cent or $1 difference per quarter. And that was good to see because there wouldn't be a significant impact to those users. So if it would have been higher, yeah, I mean, it would have been an interesting discussion to see if we should have gone that route.
Right, and like the whole philosophy of, setting a correct base charges so that you kind of aren't subject to this variability from year to year. You make sure you cover your fixed costs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
It is, you have no idea what the weather's gonna be like, right?
Yep.
And if you're completely reliant on people using water, it's more difficult to maintain enough revenue year over year. If you have a steady income like you just referenced, yeah, that changes it a little bit in your favor. But this specific methodology is saying there are costs. We know there are costs that are going to be there, whether people use water or not. Like, for example, snowbirds. They might be gone all winter long, right? They don't use any water, but the department still has costs. You know, they need to do their day-to-day work. They need to read their meters. They need to issue a bill if they have anything. Like, those things happen regardless of whether people use water or not. So it's designed in a way to recover those costs that the water department has regardless of what happens.
Right.
So tonight, you just want us to affirm that we agree with the methodology, so then you can come back on the 19th with the specific proposal for what the rates should be with this philosophy?
Right.
That
So
gives some
one,
time.
once we get direction from the board tonight, Matt and I will work on developing a few scenarios with fee schedules, and I'll distribute those to the board in advance of the next meeting. You could call us with questions, and certainly at the next meeting, we'll be looking for a vote.
So Matt, when you came last year, you had all the details of the users and what they, so if we could see that too, per, truly see who's in these tiers, right? Who's in the tiers, so we can really see what the impact is in total. Again, I'm not so concerned about a, 25% increase on $38, right? The higher tiers, it's, the higher, the bigger meters, yeah, it's bigger, but those are the businesses, et cetera. So it'd be helpful to see that prior to our vote, so we really understand what we're buying into. And if we do it on the 19th, then that gives you time, I think, to notify the town, right? And have it effective before the summer hits, correct? We got mixed up last year with the billing cycles, remember? We messed up. So it's June 1st and not July 1st, right?
Correct. And we're actually on this current billing that we're going out, we're notifying people of the rate change. And we're planning on posting it on the website. And that's basically for convenience and timing. So based upon when the board votes it, they're gonna start using the new rate the beginning of next month. So that we are currently sending the bills out. It's gonna have a notice, visit the website for the new rates. You'll decide that at the next meeting. After that, we'll post it on the website. Then the usage will start immediately after that, at the start of next month.
Okay, that's pretty fast. So the quarters are March 1st, June 1st, September 1st,
Yes,
December 1st, right?
yes,
So you've got a bill that's going to cover March 1st to June 1st,
that's
is
correct.
that right? And I'm asking, not telling.
Yeah.
So is that right?
I believe so.
I just know we got mixed up last year and we thought it was July 1st and we had to come back. and
I've worked with
change.
Tammy on this, and my understanding is usage starts the beginning of next month for the new rate.
April 1, yeah.
But the bills, I think, are
I
read
think it's April.
March 1st, June 1st, right? So they read the meter on June
Correct.
1st, right?
We're finalizing the readings now.
Okay.
We're gonna send bills out shortly, so that the new rate is gonna start next month.
The key thing for me, though, is that the new rate starts after people have been notified.
Yes.
And that's what we got in trouble with last time, I think. So again, I don't know all the dates there, but as long as we vote, the rates change, people are notified in time to say, oops, I want to change my behavior
But
relative to this
listen,
rate.
so I agree with you.
Yeah, but-
We don't vote to March 19th
Yeah.
and you want them to be effective April 1st?
Correct.
It's not a lot of time.
We got to notify quickly. Yeah.
So you can truly get the notification out quickly after March 19th?
Again, the current bill is gonna reference the town website to visit for the rate schedule.
new
You're
rates.
saying in
The
the
day
current bill,
after the
expect rates to go up or something, and they're,
The new schedule will be implemented the beginning of next month. March 20th, the day after our meeting. They will be posted on the website so people can view them then.
So the bill says new rates effective April 1, check the website for new rates,
Correct.
basically. So they
Correct.
have been notified in
Correct.
theory. Okay.
Are you seeing a similar increase in rates in surrounding towns?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's fair to say that. If you look back to last summer and the impact that it had on revenues everywhere,
Mhm.
it honestly was the wettest season in maybe 15 years. So,
Yep. Yep.
That's coming off a very dry season. So it's been very up and down.
Mhm.
But yes, we are seeing, and when communities set rates, they generally do so in a conservative way, right? Assuming not worst case scenario, but maybe they don't assume best case scenario. They're pretty careful about how, in case things don't go their way, that they're covered. But then the way that the water usage went everywhere the last
Mhm.
9 months or whatever it is, was well below any conservative estimate. So communities are trying to make up for that, for lack of a better term.
It's bad news for water rates, but exceptionally good news for our golf course. Best course condition in years.
Oh, yeah.
So, is this methodology something that you find other towns are now using substantially, or are we out of step with how other towns are approaching this pricing decision?
Are you referring to the service charge?
Service charge, base charge, and service charge, and
Yep.
usage charge.
It's common. It's not everywhere, but it's
Mhm.
common. We're seeing fixed charges more and more, whether it's a service charge like the town of Southborough has, or just like a flat fee. For example, I live in Ashland and there's just a flat fee. It's not meter based,
No
not
meter.
increasing. It's just one number that everybody pays. But we do see fixed charges more and more, almost everywhere.
Mhm.
And the work that we tend to do with the clients that we work with, if those clients want to implement a fixed charge, we would push them in the direction of the methodology used here in South.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as we discussed it last time, I think that fixed plus variable makes an awful lot of sense in terms of some motivation for people to watch how much they use of a scarce resource.
Yeah.
And this is not a bad combination, I think. So, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
So Matt, when you and Bill come back on the 19th, you're going to present the new proposed base charges, the new proposed tiers, right? As far as the rates there.
Yes.
So you expect those tiers to move up?
I think his next slide gets into that.
Yeah, we do have more slides that
So,
we
go
can
ahead.
talk about, but to answer your question, we don't expect the tier structure to change. Remember last year, we changed the tier breaks. We're not looking at that this year. We're just looking at what the rates should be.
Within the
each tier.
tiers. Okay.
Yes,
All right.
so the dollar amount increases.
Okay, so you keep showing us what you want us to see.
I think we only have 2 more slides to get through. So this one, the last one was on the service charge. And the rates, what we would recommend to the town would be based on the decision with the service charge. They kind of go hand in hand, right? Because like I said earlier, if you choose to do the methodology that was used for the service charge last year, that means the rates would in theory be lower. If you don't choose to do that service charge methodology and you increase the service charge but by a lesser amount, then the rates would be higher. They kind of go hand in hand. So this is what we've done so far. And we do have, as was mentioned earlier, that all those numbers that you referenced, we have those numbers, but for tonight's presentation, we kept it a little higher level. But we have a few numbers here for you. So if you were to use the same methodology for the service charge, we're looking at a 3% rate increase for the next few years. And that was in line with what we were looking at last year. Now, the service charge is higher, as we talked about, but the rates themselves, the flow-based rates, would be in line with what we were showing last year.
I'm sorry, so the proposed rate increase, this is if you increase the base rate by roughly 25% from this year into the next year, you can expect that the projected increase of the base rate or the flow base rates for the next.
Flow-based rates. So the
Flow.
rates in the tiers, which I refer to as flow-based rates, because
Okay.
we're charging for flow. That's why.
So instead of $2, it's $2.06. That's what we'd end up with for that first
At
year.
3%, yeah.
So then,
To me, the most important sentence is this one, which says, if we go with that methodology, we're going to end up with an average bill of $12.50 per quarter, so $50 a year for the average water bill increase.
Yes, that would be the increase over what they currently pay. Yes. If you were to do the larger service charge increase in the 3% full base, yep. And then the flip of that is, if you were to choose not to do the same methodology, and I put 4.5% in for an increase of the service charge. I'm not saying that's what you should do, but just to show you an example, that would be a 5% increase in the rates, the flow-based rates over the next few years. And the impact of that is $6.50 per quarter. So that's a fairly sizable difference between the two. But it's one of those things that if you're doing less in year one, then you're gonna do more in the subsequent years, whereas the other one are gonna go in the opposite direction. They're gonna meet in the middle. So it's really which path you want to take.
You're happy?
Yeah, yeah. And I think the last year, when you had a, a bigger presentation, because we were, doing a lot more things. It was also interesting to me because I think you had more slides that showed like year over year retained earnings, all of that. That would also be interesting.
Yeah.
Just to have at hand for the next.
Yeah, I think that for next presentation, we would model it similar to last year's.
Okay,
And you're available to come on the 19th?
So let me check. them.
So that's a Tuesday. This is a very unusual night that we're meeting as far as the Monday
I think
goes.
you already told me about that one.
Yeah, you're
Yeah, I
at the
think I
Cape,
put it
you'll be here late.
Yeah.
I'll be here late.
Yes.
Come on now,
Oh,
we're easy.
Love that.
We did.
Okay, sorry. I have another meeting that night. That's what he's referring to. 19th. I didn't put it in. Yes, I can be.
Okay.
I might need to be in the back end of the agenda though, as Bill referenced.
If that's the case, you should let Bill know that so that when Andrew puts it together, he knows where to put you.
And we do have one more slide if you want to cover it. It's about capital. We can go real quick through it. So with either scenario, meaning regardless of really which path you take, included in our analysis are these things for capital. The presidential drive at Fisher Road Loop, I think Bill mentioned that earlier. And miscellaneous engineering, which we're carrying as 250,000 FY25. That's in the water budget as of now. And $100,000 annually going forward from there. Also two pieces of equipment, they cost $80,000 and $55,000 respectively, or each. So all of that is currently included. We did talk about at least other capital that is not currently included, subject to recommendation as part of the water master plan. That's Lovers Lane, water mains, and the Tara Tank painting project. Those are projects that we did discuss, but they're not currently included in our analysis. Additional capital investment is likely if and when the retained earnings balance builds. So in other words, let's say things get dry and you start building up your reserves a little bit. So spending it on capital would be a good way to do that. A good way to use those funds. And as Bill mentioned earlier, we're assuming no Hopkinen contribution at this point in the analysis.
Roughly, what's the cost of the Lovers Lane and Tara Tank repainting projects?
Off the top of my head, I want to say it's just over $1 million because we had talked about the contribution from Hopkinton not quite covering it.
Okay,
And that's a number that Ms. Galligan had given us to work with. That's why we
Right.
did what we did.
Now, bear in mind, that number is a few years old. It's from that 2022 master.
right. How about the tank painting?
That's going to be about 2 million.
Wow.
does that 1 million include like a repaving of the road after you put it in the new water main or?
Good question. I'm not sure what the
Okay.
basis is for that. It's not in the report.
All right.
No, I don't remember that. We didn't get into that detail. She just gave us a number.
Because I'm remembering, wasn't there when we did for the paving that was done last round, wasn't there the bid that went out and one that part of the alt bid was for Lovers Lane?
Yeah,
Yes,
that was.
That's a big,
yes,
What do you
yes.
think?
And they
That's a
took it
big
out.
alternative.
They
Yeah,
took it out.
yeah.
They took it out because it was such a
Huge?
big thing, yeah.
Okay,
So you're right, it was.
And the problem was that it was, apparently there's subsurface problems on Lovers Lane. So if you pave, you're not going to get much life
well,
out of it.
I was just
So-
mentioning it because, that you would want to coordinate the two, right?
So, we could share with highway improvements funds. But I'd have to look at that a little closer. It wasn't addressed or broken out in the report, so I just have the project and a value.
And that's
Worth,
something
worth
that-
thinking about though. Yeah. Okay.
All right, anybody else want to make a comment before we give instructions, our direction to Matt and to Bill? So it looks to me like the starting point is to decide whether we agree to continue what we started last year, which is to come up with rates that cover fixed cost with the base charge. And then back into the tier rates based on what else is needed to get us to the appropriate retained earnings.
I think that makes sense.
Okay. Okay, so that's the motion, is to basically continue the path we started last year, which is to cover fixed cost, projected fixed cost with the base charge, and to then set the variable rate based on what we need to keep the retained earnings at the 20% of cost.
Second,
Okay. Any further discussion? Andrew?
Nope.
Okay, how are you voting?
Yes.
hands only. We don't need to.
Oh, that's true, we're not doing Zoom.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
there you go, 5-0 to carry on.
Okay,
Thank
Okay,
you.
so we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
okay, we'll present that for you.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you.
So Bill, as you know, when we were interviewing you, we talked about how important it is to let residents know ahead of time. So just make sure that you do everything you can so we don't surprise anybody as far as these rates go.
Absolutely.
I think it should probably go in next Friday's missive as well as, the rates are going to change, but watch this space.
Sure.
And this way they're changing well before the summer, where people, if they don't want to water the lawn, they can turn off the water system, right, in advance, so it won't be after the fact. Okay, so thank you, Matt. Nice to see you again.
See you in 2
Thank you.
weeks.
So, Andrew, do you have a chair's report?
No, I don't.
Okay, so we're going to go right to Mr. Hamilton's members report because it involves Mr. Cundiff, who is going to stay with us.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm just going to give a quick update on the Atwood Street parcel. As you know, we found lead contamination in there. The good news is that we did not find measurable PCBs with Mr. Cundiff, and Par joined us on the phone and tried to educate me a bit. The next step is to do a second round of testing on the existing samples. That second round of testing will tell us what it is we're really dealing with. We found a problem. Now we need to figure out what the chemistry we're actually dealing with is. And then that will begin to inform a plan, which will probably, in the first step, involve taking more samples so that we can understand the more clearly the extent and breadth. It turns out that this is not an unusual problem. This is a problem common to water tanks, which were all painted with lead paint. And as Bill pointed out to me, there were probably 5 or 6 crews for the last 100 years that have been out doing this sort of work all over New England and all over the country. And they all use the same stuff and they all use the same methodology. The contamination is mostly around the drip line of the tank. There is some contamination also in where the tank actually fell, but more testing is needed. And then ultimately we'll have to get to a mitigation plan. That mitigation plan will probably be informed by the use of the parcel. So we're talking, we're not really making any plans right now for developing the parcel until we sort of know how deep the hole is. I'm going to meet with Bill, Mark, and Brian, just because we have to have a conversation about who pays for it and where the money comes from.
As far as this additional testing?
Where the additional testing and then, long-term, whatever we have to do is going to cost money. And it's, as you know, these things are not cheap.
Yeah, I think that makes good sense. I mean, we've talked a little bit about possible uses for the property, but to me, you need to know what we start with and what's going on there before you spend any energy trying to come up with hypotheticals there. So I think this is a very prudent way to proceed. And I know a lot of folks are interested. So I guess the message is stay tuned. And as we learn more, I assume that we will inform the public as we get more data about this process.
Marguerite and I did meet with some of the abutters last week, and I brought the map that Bill provided, and I provided that to a couple of folks in some digital form. We want to make sure people know what's going on there so that, to the greatest extent possible, we're not surprising people.
Good. And I've spoken with one abutter also. And again, I think it's good to maintain active communication with what's going on there. And as we learn more, we'll let people know.
Good enough? Okay. We're having a butter here tonight. Okay, so, that's it? Okay.
That's it.
That was easy.
Yeah, I told you
Yeah.
this is really good. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
coming for
Have a
both
good night,
things.
everyone.
When you have real data, it may get harder.
Yeah.
Mr. Purple,
Yes, I have a couple of items tonight. Actually, one of the items on here, that I have under my report, David Joyner has, submitted a letter of resignation, from Youth Commission. And, his situation has changed. He's not leaving town, but, his priorities have changed and therefore he's got to step back from the board. And that's unfortunate. His term was up on June 30th, this coming June 30, but he needs to step back, as soon as possible. And so he submitted this letter. I don't know whether, Kathy or Marguerite wanted to say something, because you're probably both better, more qualified to speak to his, his involvement in terms of youth and family, his time on the board, if either of you had a comment.
so Marguerite was a longtime member of the board itself, and I've been a longtime founder of the Friends Group and treasurer for like 20 years. So we are both intimately involved and totally supported. I'd like to at least read a piece of his letter because I thought it was such a
Very
nice
well.
letter. So the last part of it is, says this: my term on the committee expires on June 30th, 2024. I appreciated my time with the Youth and Family Services team and have been fortunate to see firsthand the valuable support that this group provides for the town under great leadership. I wish the commission continued success in its mission and objectives. So I thought it was very nice what he said. So wanted to point that out. Okay.
A couple of other things. The moderator is going to be holding his pre-town meeting on March 13th at 6 p.m. at the senior center. As with the past couple of years, these pre-town meetings are not public meetings. They're simply, the moderator holds meetings with all of the sponsors of the articles have been invited to attend. He has sent out separate invitations, and we'll use that meeting to try to determine the flow of the meeting. I don't believe he's going to have his consent list at that point. But we should have a little bit more information on the meeting and his thoughts on the meeting after that, so I can report back, or he can come to the next meeting and he can report back to the board as to, the results of that meeting.
Does he, sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. Does he want help with the consent as far as what we would suggest?
He usually asks me for my
Okay,
thoughts, so I have roughly 24 articles
yeah.
I will suggest to him. And we'll see what he does. And, I think that he has tried to be somewhat aggressive with the consent list. There always seems to be one or two that gets pulled off before it's voted. But we have been pretty good about taking a number of articles off the table, usually administrative articles, routine articles, or things that everyone agrees, including the sponsor, advisory, and select board, that we should be unanimously doing these things. So I will work with him to come up with that, and hopefully we can get that out a little bit earlier than last year.
Okay.
I got an update from Tim Davis, today on the, spring summer registration for camp. They opened registration on Saturday, March 2nd. If you remember, we opened it early for residents, so that we can let residents get first crack at things. Over the course of, excuse me, this past Saturday and Sunday, they took in 723 registrations across the entire seasonal offerings. Most of them were for the summer 8-week program. Only one session sold out, and there's about 10 to 15 spaces left across each of the other 7 weeks. This year, they mirrored each camp week with a half-day specialty option focusing on STEM, the arts, and sports-specific offerings. They're seeing strong numbers in those. They offered a resident-only 10% discount for siblings. And they're seeing significant portion of the population taking advantage They also opened registration today for non-residents. They're seeing about an additional 70+ signups already. And they're about 24% up over last year's registration numbers after the first 72 hours. So things are looking very good for camp sign up. So I commend, Tim and his staff and, Christina, who is, newly minted to the team, is obviously, have her hand in this now. So, that's a nice start to see for summer registration. And finally, I have one thing, so the, DPW will issue fines for violations at the transfer station. They're far and few between, but they do happen. And sometimes when fines are issued, they are appealed. And when they have been appealed in the past, this board has, because the board really didn't want to do something at the meeting and bring somebody in, the board assigned a member to represent the board to do the appeal hearing and gave that person, Sam's smiling, it gave this person the authority to make the decision on behalf of the board for the appeal. We have such an appeal sitting on my desk now. So I am asking the board, A, if you want to continue to do the same process as before, and if B, you do, who would you like to represent the board?
I think Judge Dennington is a good choice.
So take it one question at a time. Does anyone want to change the precedent of appointing one person to act as judge here?
Didn't town administrator used to do that?
No.
I thought.
I was not entrusted with that.
You didn't raise
Oh.
your hand. Okay, so does anybody want to change the methodology, which I guess the other choice would be that we do it?
I don't think we should change necessarily. I mean, it seems to me having a select board member, make the call is not bad. But I don't think we need to debate it as a group in an open meeting, frankly.
Well, I'll do it if you want me to do it.
You're okay with
Sure.
one person?
I was actually just joking, but I'd
Gregory?
be delighted if you want to do it. Yeah. If Andrew wants to do it.
Andrew's raising his hand over here.
I think.
I'll take one step back.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Good luck.
Then I will coordinate with Mr. Dennington about the details.
You- Will you wear your robes when you hold the hearing?
I think a wig is really.
Okay, moving on.
Yeah, so that's all I have. Thank you.
Alrighty, consent agenda is small, but I do want to, look, we got to talk about A. So let's go ahead and get B approved. We're doing that because we disbanded the community center last time, so they need somebody to approve those last.
I actually heard that meeting and it looked okay to me, but I didn't remember in total detail.
You okay?
Fine with them. Yep.
Okay. Anybody have a question on the last set of community center minutes? All right, so someone make a motion.
Move we approve consent agenda B.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, they're done officially now. Okay, so this is where we are with the warrant right now. We just got a text, Andrew and I just got a text from Emula Trail. They have pulled the MBTA article for this town meeting, so they've asked us to actually take it off the warrant, so they don't have to go to town meeting and have it indefinitely postponed. So.
I just
Andrew-
want to give a little bit more context to it because I
Okay,
know.
so
yeah, we're-
go for it.
Sure. This has to do with they discovered that there's some incorrect calculations about whether or not the portion of the overlay district closest to the train station meets the density requirements to comply with the MBTA communities law, and that the assumptions, the mathematical assumptions that they were working on before they now understand are not correct. So that's going to require a whole adjustment. And based on that, the planning board just voted within the last hour to just pull the article and then take a stab at it, either at maybe a later spring meeting, special town meeting, or at a fall town meeting, TBD.
So the consultant did those calculations, right? So they
Yeah.
made an error apparently in that process or?
That's what it appears.
It appears.
Okay. Well,
And they voted 5-0 too, wasn't, there was no one arguing.
Okay.
Previously, all.
clearly you don't want to go ahead with something that has a flaw.
Well, and at this meeting, I think the plan was for Bowler to come and give some options about how you could tweak, and I started to see some of the maps. It's just way too much information to
Yeah.
adjust on the fly, just for.
You're dead at town meeting if it gets too complicated, for sure. Yeah, and again, you want it to pass, so it needs to be reasonably understandable.
They'll just have to be careful as far as the timing of the next meeting, because you wait to fall and then it doesn't pass, then you really are,
Yep.
you're up against the wall. So they probably will have to do something earlier. Okay, so the reason this is related to consent item A is that we thought we were going to sign the warrant tonight. So what the plan is, if everybody agrees, is we're going to sign the signature page to it tonight, but they've got to tweak it now to get this out of there. And I think there's a couple of typos too that need to be fixed. So if everybody agrees, we're going to get a clean signature page tonight to actually sign that can get attached tomorrow when they get these things fixed. Is that correct,
Okay.
Mark? Vanessa?
Yeah, so everything, so, as soon as the text came through, so everything has been updated. The changes that were the additional tweaks that needed to be done. The article is out. The only thing that needs to be done is just the pagination.
So,
We've got one more thing though, so let's
but
keep
the
going.
numbering
We're going to be
changes.
talking about
Yes.
one Article 2 in a minute that we may vote to take off too. We may not, but we're going to talk about it. So we've got to see how that one turns out.
Correct.
Okay. All
But
right.
that won't affect the number.
Yeah, I did want to
What's
bring the
that?
board's attention. It turns out that there is also a fairly large event that's scheduled to happen at Neary on the same day as
Town meeting.
town meeting, and we could have a parking problem.
Well, so just so everyone knows, it's the Easter egg hunt of the kids, the children's group. And it's at Neary, it's not Trottier.
Trottier.
So, you know, they can park at Neary, not at Trottier.
But
It's
we
being
also, we
discussed.
sometimes overflow into the Neary lot
Right.
for a town meeting.
So it's been discussed with them and the board, and they're well aware of the conflict and they voted to go forward with it.
And what time is that event?
I believe it's 11.
It's
So
11
we're going to
o'clock.
be up and running by then, so they may have trouble
They're the
more
ones that
than,
won't have the parking.
more than we will, yeah.
If people come.
So,
So this is kinder group, and you know, it's a big group though. So this is not necessarily a small amount of kids. It could be a large amount of kids, right? So does someone want to volunteer to maybe take another stab at talking to them? And the problem is they don't really have a better date. They've got the next day is their rain date. And then of course, Easter is the next weekend. So that's a problem. They don't really have, unless they backed it up, they don't have a really good choice as far as where to move it.
is there another parking overflow option down there? I mean, there's field space, but the rec guys don't like people driving on the fields to park, certainly. So. I don't know.
Well, the first question is, does anyone want to take a stab at talking to whoever is the chair of the board and seeing if you could prevail that, you know, we need him at town meeting too.
Well, that's kind of the secondary issue, which is, I think, now I'm assuming they did this with the approval of the school committee, because they're using the school property.
I would think it's rec that approved it, right, Mark? Because rec really
Yes.
schedules the fields, et
Yeah.
cetera. So I think it's rec that actually
Yeah.
approved this without thinking about the impact on town.
How long does that event last? Hour or two max?
Can't, I mean, it's an Easter egg hunt.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably, so there's supposed to be food trucks and,
Well, it may be longer than I
yeah,
thought.
so, maybe we use it for lunch, but, there's probably not much we can do. I can get in touch with them.
Well, that's interesting because Jim Haggerty was having trouble he couldn't get food trucks to come to the town meeting. He's got the Girl Scouts doing the food because he couldn't get food trucks to come. So you want to take a stab at saying maybe,
I could certainly ask if it could be raining that day.
yeah, and just go to their rain day, and hope they're done rain on Sunday.
Yeah, because otherwise, yeah, I think they're gonna have, you're right, the Ginder group's gonna have a parking problem, I suspect. Because, this is likely to, and we should, as a matter of policy, encourage people not to schedule town events on the day of town meeting. We need people to show up and participate.
Who knows when they schedule this? But yeah, we should be more cognizant of what's going on. to not let this happen. Okay, so there's it. So, we're gonna talk about this article in a second. Then, Mark, you've got the signature page ready to sign? Okay. All right, so I don't see anything to really approve on A. We're gonna
Okay.
sign it, right?
We just gotta wait, wait until we go through the, discuss Article 48.
And then we really will know what it's gonna look like. Okay, so other matters. We were going to, initially, we were gonna sign the, the select board makes a lot of the motions at town meeting, the ones that we sponsor. So we go through and just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. We were gonna do it, but we thought better since there's so many articles that are probably gonna be on the consent agenda.
Yep.
We're gonna wait until we know what that looks like and then assign.
Can we offer a preference? I've got 4 or 5
so
that I've
that's
been
what-
involved in,
well,
so I will send.
Andrew's call, but I was gonna say, who wants, if you got one, raise your hand. If not, we're just gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Okay, so that's gonna wait.
So I will just point out that a lot of the articles that belong to select board are routine articles that we see every year.
Yep.
Likely will end up on consent list and likely you will not get to make your motion.
I-
So I'm just pointing out that, we will set it up so that each article has somebody to make the motion.
Yep.
But it may be they get put on consent list.
I think 4 of my 6 last year were consent. I'm trying
Yes,
to do better than
yeah.
that this year, so.
5 out of 6.
5 out of 6 are all 6.
All right, so next we really just covered review of the outstanding issues with the warrant. Let me just, though, make sure everybody's on the same page as far as what happened with advisory last Wednesday. So they revoted a few things. We ended up with an agreement on the budget, which does include the new town engineer for DPW. It's got no new additions in the police department yet, so we agreed with that. So we come around to that. So that's that budget. They also voted 5-1 to support the golf course irrigation project. So that's the 2 votes they changed on, were the engineer, that was a 3-3, changed that to 6-0 after hearing from Bill. And then after hearing from Tony Schoner, they changed that vote to 5-1. And the only reason there was a 1 was because he thought that it should be funded out of the revolving account instead of CPC. He didn't disagree with the project. He just thought it should be funded that way.
It's good.
So we've got the only difference, if you look at all the votes we've got between advisory and select board, the only difference right now is the vote for the stabilization capital fund for Assabet. We voted 2-3 to not support the regional one. We voted 6-0 to support the K-8 special ed one, and so did advisory. So advisory has voted 0-6 not to support Assabet. We voted 5-0 to support it, so. It's a small number to us. We can say to town meeting, this is a pro, this is a con, and
Yep.
get that settled pretty quick, I think.
Yep.
Right, I don't think there's gonna be a whole lot of talk about that one, but that's it. So everything else is in line. Okay, next one, we've got article number 48 on what we've got tonight with the warrant. Proposed, it's a citizen petition by Joe Palmer to increase the threshold for CPA funded projects when they are not town-owned property to 2/3 from a simple majority, which is what it is right now. As everybody knows, part of the process to get the warrant ready is we send it to town council. He reviews all the articles for their legality and words, he adds words, whatever. And he came back and said that this is illegal because it conflicts with state law. He then checked with the Attorney General to make sure he was right. Attorney General came back in writing and said he was right, that it would be rejected if it came to them. So we've got a couple choices. We can vote to remove it tonight because we know it's not going to go anywhere, or we can leave it and let it go through town meeting, let town meeting vote on it. I believe Jay's going to stand up though and say, or Paul's going to say it's illegal, but still allow the vote, right? And then let it go to the AG and get rejected. So I'm going to go this way.
Sure.
Okay. Al?
I would be in favor of leaving it in. I think, the concept that, citizens are allowed to put something before us, no matter whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. I think it's showing respect for the citizens and their desire to debate various matters. And, hopefully this will be a very short debate with an indefinite postponement, but I think we should leave it in.
Okay. Marguerite?
I'd like to hear from the person who submitted the article.
What he wants to do?
Yep.
Okay. Joe, do you mind coming up?
Plain and simple, I'd like to see it be voted on. I think it would serve you show the sentiment of the town regarding these types of projects and the way that they would like to be it, way they would like it to be. Even if the AG wants to shoot it down, I think it sets a precedent as to the feelings of the people that were at town meeting.
So you wanted to stay?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Marguerite,
Okay, so I'm okay with it staying.
Sam?
We get a lot of feedback that town meeting is too long. I think this wastes town meeting members' time, so I would pull it.
So I am kind of torn here. I kind of agree with everybody. So I'm going to vote to leave it on based on what Joe said, which is at least you get an idea of what town meeting thinks about the idea of it, even though it's not going to be effective at least until state law changes.
Yeah, I would also just leave it on because I looked at the case that cited in the draft letter, and also I went back and looked at the CPA statute. I didn't find a specific requirement in the CPA statute that approval by town meeting for a specific project has to be majority. So I think if it's voted at town meeting and it's not accepted, then the whole question of whether or not it was proper for the select board to remove it or not just becomes moot. And
So
then
we
if
just let
if it passes, it still has to go to the AG.
Yeah, so we just let the AG make the decision this way and we hear what the town thinks about it.
But it was, looking at it was interesting because it is the case that the select board does have the right to, or something that is for an improper purpose to not include it on the warrant. But I agree that, you should be thinking about making those decisions really carefully.
All right, so I'll make a motion to keep Article 48 on the warrant.
Second.
Second.
Yep.
Okay, all in favor? All opposed? Okay, so 4-1 to keep it on the warrant. Okay, Joe.
Thank you.
Ready? Okay, the next one was, planning board was meeting tonight too, so they couldn't come here, we couldn't go there. So we put this on there in case we wanted to zoom into their meeting, but I don't see any purpose of doing that at this point, given that we know they pulled the article. And there's a Neary Building Committee meeting that starts at 7:30 that I'd like to attend to. So for both reasons, I don't see any reason to zoom in unless you want to. They may even be done at this point. They've already voted to pull it.
Yeah, I think one thing that might be helpful is, the next decision, which is probably going to be kind of a joint planning board, select board decision, is when the next version of this comes. Do you wait until the fall town meeting or do you try a special town meeting between now and then? And my preference is to try to get this done earlier rather than later. Partly
So-
because we've already been targeting for our fall town meeting, a big discussion and decision on regional dispatch and
I agree with you. So let's just get them in here and get a date that seems to be mutually agreeable to do it. So we're going to have two special meetings.
And Andrew, I think that the usual concern about special town meeting is that you might not get a quorum, but this is popular enough that I think you'll get a good turnout whenever we have it.
Yeah.
So I think
think so
that's
too.
useful to keep moving.
And the special town meeting we had for the downtown district where it was, 10 articles, one evening, I thought was great.
And there was plenty of people at that. meeting,
Yes.
So, all right, everybody agree? So we'll get them in here and get a date set for that one, and then we'll start talking about the date for our fall one. All right, I think that's it. Any,
Just my question is, I have the English major. I have a number of like little typo things happening, like it says trials instead of.
Yeah, we caught that. We got,
Got that one?
got that one, yeah?
And there were a couple of others where it was a citizen's petition, but it was not listed as a citizen's petition.
So can you show Mark and Vanessa?
Yes,
We're about to
that's what
start.
I was saying.
We're about
Let's
to
adjourn. I will just show that to Mark and Vanessa. It's just totally little housekeeping.
So, yeah, so I will say if the petitioner of a citizen petition submitted a summary, then the summary, and I assume that's what you're saying, the summary is listed as they submitted it. If there was no summary submitted, then it is simply put, this is a citizen's petition.
All right, okay.
So that's why some of the citizen petitions don't have,
Don't have it. Okay,
correct.
that makes sense. Thank you.
And one other correction that we made was in the last version that went out midday for articles 6 and 7. Those were Mrs. Faniff's articles.
Yep.
It said in this version, it said select board was at town meeting, but we voted not to support those two. So that's
So
the,
Andrew fixed that. And then one other thing too that happened between last week and this week that was advisory related. They voted 0-6 not to support the Gold Star article to compensate parents.
Brave Act.
And
yeah.
so Possibility pulled that article. So it's
Yeah.
not on here anymore. So we're not even going to deal with that as far as town meeting goes. It's gone.
Right, so just one other question, just about wording, like Article 30, which is the CPA. It says if you haven't spent the funds by December 2026, the funds to be returned. Is that what you haven't spent or is that the whole shebang?
What hasn't been spent?
Then shouldn't it say unspent? funds?
It's a CPC article. The wording
They
is,
just
the
do
wording,
it
the wording is their wording.
Okay,
That's what was voted.
all right.
But you're right, they would have made it.
Yeah.
clear.
Should have been that way, yeah.
All right.
So we've
Vanessa-
fixed everything we can fix.
Yeah, no, we can fix what somebody else says it's their words. So anyone in the audience, some public comment?
No hands up.
No hands up. Okay. What time is it? Snap. 7:43, not bad. All right, so motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?